Now it's time for Toker Talk Radio, the voice of the marijuana nation.
What are you people? On dope?
Where you can toke.
I inhale frequently.
Or you can talk.
I experimented with marijuana and didn't inhale.
Or you can toke and talk.
10 federal criminal penalties for possession of up to 1 ounce of marijuana.
While we talk about toke on Toker Talk Radio.
So, by the way, when it comes to pot, if you're 40 years old, you live in a log cabin in Oregon, you got 12 giant pot plants in your backyard, have a ball.
Live from beautiful Portland, Oregon at Rolla J Studios.
Hey, this is great. Just not cannabis.
Plus your calls live at 971-533-7111.
They're walking on their pants with their cap on backwards, listening to Enema Man and Snoopy Poop Dog.
What's to keep somebody from getting all potted up on weed and then getting behind the wheel? Gateway theory doesn't work. It's a reality.
Holland, is it real? Don't tease me.
We're locking up people that take a couple of puffs of marijuana, and the next thing you know, they got 10 years.
And now, here's your host, the guru of ganja graphics, the sultan of sativa statistics, and the worst nightmare of a reefer mad prohibitionist. A polite, perspicacious, productive pothead with a propensity for PowerPoint. Radical Russ Belville.
All right, welcome back, Tokers and Tokettes, non-toking lovers of liberty. Hour 2 here on the Russ Belville Show, live from Aspen, Colorado. Welcome to the weekend. It's a beautiful weekend here in Aspen. The sun is shining, temperatures in the 70s. Right after the show, I'll be heading out to a party, a fundraiser party, out at Jerry Goldstein's house. He's the esteemed criminal defense attorney. I could tell you everybody that he's defended, but it's a long list. But Manuel Noriega is on the list, the former leader of Panama. Google it, kids. Look it up. But anyway, that party's coming up here at the end of the hour, so I might skip out of here just a little bit early so I can make my way to the shuttle buses. But in the meantime, we've got some more clips from the NORML Aspen Legal Seminar. We're going to hear from Danica Noble. She's with NORML Women of Washington and does a lot of great work up there in Washington State. And she's also worked a lot in various federal agencies. So she gave a presentation on the feds and the various agencies that have some sort of impact on marijuana laws and her perspective on their reaction to legalization. We'll have that full presentation available on my SoundCloud page, but the clip we're going to bring you is her discussing Washington State market caps, where the state tried to predetermine how many dispensaries and how much canopy space there would be for the legal marijuana market in Washington, and what a disaster that turned out to be. So you'll hear that in the first segment. After our 20 after break, we'll have a second segment where we'll feature Adam Wolf, an attorney who's litigated in front of the U.S. Supreme Court, discussing the court cases that are being brought in federal courts to try to undermine the legalization law in Colorado and the other states for that matter as well. You've heard of the Nebraska and Oklahoma case, and Nebraska and Oklahoma suing Colorado at the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court rejecting the suit 6-2. But he discusses another case where a Holiday Inn tried to sue under RICO statutes. And RICO is the Racketeer Influenced Corrupt Organizations Act. It's used for continuing criminal enterprises. It's used for, mobsters, mafia, right? And this was a case where Holiday Inn tried to use it under the guise of a litigation firm, a lobbyist firm called Safe Streets Alliance. He discusses that case and how the RICO applies to the legal marijuana states. And then in our third segment, we'll hear from Mary Kahn, an attorney from Texas, who gave us a rundown on mental illness in America and how much of that is intertwined with our criminal justice system. So some great highlights coming up here in just a little bit. And before we hit the break, I just wanted to mention also, I was reading a piece online about Donald Trump, calling him out for basically calling out the media for not calling Donald Trump a racist. It's like, it's how the media weasels around certain things. They won't say that someone lied. They'll say they misspoke. In this case, they say his comments are racially tinged. No, they're just racist. The latest one is he wants to disqualify the judge in his Trump University case because the judge is of Hispanic heritage and belongs to a Latino law society. Right, so he wants to disqualify someone for federal work based on their race, based on their heritage, and cites the fact that, well, it's a conflict of it's a conflict of interest because I'm the one who wants to build the wall. Yeah, and then I guess earlier today he had an appearance where he pointed out an African American in his crowd and said, "Look, there's my African American," like my African American. Oh my God, what a crazy race this is. We're back in just 2 minutes.
This is the Russ Belville Show on CannabisRadio.com.
Next to THC and CBD, you can now add CBR to your cannabis vernacular. CBR as in CannabisRadio.com.
Great websites today need expert web design and development and need to be e-commerce ready and mobile friendly. But building a marketable and profitable website can be an uphill climb. Ready to make your new website or replace your existing website? Think Orange as the new way to get in the black. Orange Hill Development works with Fortune 500 companies and offer the same top quality development service at a fraction of what other providers charge. Brands like Absolute, Carlsberg, and Nestea trust Orange Hill Development. Find out why you should trust your website with Orange Hill. Contact Orange Hill for a consultation today at orangehilldevelopment.com. Growing green to generate more green.
Hello to all you happy herbalizers, smiling trippy hippies, and everyone who believes in freedom and tolerance. This is The Grow Show, and I'm Kyle Cushman.
From food to fuel, from remedy to resource.
Welcome my guest, Ed Rosenthal, the guru of ganja. Let me ask you, right now I hear your lighter clicking. Are you smoking indoor or are you smoking sun-grown?
What am I smoking? I'm smoking concentrate.
Way to get out of the answer there. So you're truly like the king, right? You just clap your hands and somebody brings you a bowl and you're all set, right?
I wish that were the case.
The Grow Show with Kyle Cushman, only on CannabisRadio.com.
You're listening to Radical Russ on the Russ Belville Show.
Are you playing an acoustic guitar but want to be louder without an amp? Try a resonator guitar. The fingerboard extension has National Resophonic and other resonators, square necks and round necks. Stop by the fingerboard extension downtown Corvallis at 120 Northwest 2nd Street today, or check out its inventory on the web at fingerboardextension.com. Go wild hog in the woods.
Remember, friends, there's more to life than marijuana. I just can't remember what it is. Why'd I come in here? You're tuned into the Russ Belville Show, the voice of the marijuana nation, only on CannabisRadio.com.
Welcome back, everyone. Radical Russ coming to you live from the Gant Resort here in Aspen, Colorado for the NORML Aspen Legal Seminar. And I saw something here in Aspen when I was out at the grocery store, something I have yet to have seen. It was a man wearing a Donald Trump 2016 t-shirt. And I do not believe wearing it ironically. Like, I believe this guy really supports Donald Trump for president. And it's remarkable. You know, he seemed to be, he was walking upright and seemed to be capable of dressing himself and driving a vehicle. Had the look of somebody who has a job and is able to, think and speak English. So I don't know what the point is, what the excuse is for this guy wanting to support Donald Trump or anybody wanting to support Donald Trump. And I've taken a lot of heat on the politics angle here because I've been so Bernie or bust and everything and kind of and vehemently against Hillary Clinton. I get people that say, well, what do you want, President Trump? I'm like, no, absolutely not. You thought George W. Bush was a bad example. Oh my God, this guy is an outright xenophobic, racist, homophobe, misogynist, just every terrible word you can come up with to describe a person fits Donald Trump. So no, I don't want a Donald Trump presidency. That's why I'm lobbying so hard for Bernie Sanders, is because he's the one who can beat Trump in the polls, at least. That's what we've seen so far. And I just feel like Democrats don't recognize what a tragically flawed candidate Hillary Clinton is. Now, we're starting to see some effects of the Feel the Burn movement, by the way. The news in today is that Debbie Wasserman Schultz out of Florida, the DNC chair, has flip-flopped on her payday loan stand. She was standing with the payday loan industry against Elizabeth Warren's Consumer Bureau on these new regulations to rein in the predatory practices of these payday loan places. And Debbie, being in the pocket of these payday loansters, was opposing, Elizabeth Warren on this. Well, she's finally flipped, decided to support Elizabeth Warren's bureau on these payday loans. So it seems to me like she's starting to feel the burn. She's starting to hear the calls for her head, the calls for her ouster as the head of the DNC in response to what a lot of people feel is kind of a slanted, crooked treatment of Bernie Sanders. So that's some interesting news that's happening. And more we're seeing the polls that are, that put Trump and Hillary neck and neck. I've seen one now that puts Trump a point ahead of Hillary. And there's that op-ed that I just read in the Wall Street Journal that Douglas Schoen, a pollster and Clinton confidant back in the Bill Clinton days, who's saying that she might not be the nominee, that these flaws may have caught up with her. Her penchant for flip-flopping and picking whichever side is politically expedient, her constant misspeaking and mistakes that she makes are finally catching up, especially after this Inspector General's report showing that just about everything she said to defend herself in this email case has been a cover-up or a lie. So that's why I'm so vehemently still fighting for Bernie Sanders, is because I still believe he can be nominated, and I still believe he's the best way to defeat Donald Trump. Now, should this not happen, should we end up with Hillary versus Trump, I think a strong case can be made for supporting Gary Johnson in this election. First of all, you got Gary Johnson and William Weld, the former governor of Massachusetts, two-term Republican governors who served in Democratic states. So you got that maybe they can work across the aisle a little bit. And as libertarians go, they're not as libertarian-y as a lot of people would like, right? Gary Johnson got booed the other night at the Libertarian Convention for suggesting that driver's licenses was a good thing, that the government licensing drivers was a good thing. That got boos from the libertarians. Boo! We should be able to do anything we want, anytime we want, anywhere we want. I saw a meme the other day that said cats are the perfect libertarians, completely convinced they're absolutely independent, but totally dependent on those around them. That's a good point. But I think this election could be a good one for getting some third-party representation. If any good comes of this, I think what it'll be is that Gary Johnson gets in the race, siphons away a lot of votes from Trump, from Republicans who just can't bring themselves to vote for him, and siphons away votes from Democrats that can't stand the thought of Hillary Clinton. And that we get a situation where the Libertarian Party could actually rise to being above 15% in the polls and be included in presidential debates, and we'd have an actual three-party race. Now, in that three-party race, it's possible that nobody gets enough delegates or gets enough electoral college votes. Then it goes to the House of Representatives, and then, oh no, the Republican wins. Oh, well, let's go back to Aspen for the legal seminar. We got a great presentation from Danica Noble talking about the implementation of Washington state market caps in legalization, thanks to Mark Kleiman and Botec, the company that was hired by the taxpayers to consult in Washington.
I am so excited I get to talk about this one. Market caps. Anybody heard of Mark Kleiman? if we had a Clinton presidency, he is pretty likely to be on that transition team, I think. And I don't know how that makes you feel, but lots of activists and people who have spent a lot of time in this industry think, even though Mark has a lot of perhaps inappropriate assumptions, he's still going to be better than anyone who's ever been in that role before. Okay, but let's talk about what happened in Washington. Washington, Mark Kleiman, who is not a lawyer, who is not an economist, who is not a statistician, decided what he would do with a bunch of the money through the LCB. That's our regulatory body, the Liquor Control Board, Liquor Cannabis Board now. We are going to estimate exactly how many retail locations are required to serve the demand. And we're going to find out exactly how much canopy space is required to serve that demand. His numbers were extremely specific. So spent a ton of money looking at it, and we are going to have, and I'm going to get the numbers wrong right now, like 223 retail locations. You're like, 23? Really? You got down to the 3 there? And you did that estimating what was a black and a gray market? Wow, I always thought that was impossible to do. That's weird. Oh, and that's the exact number of liquor stores that the state used to have. So, in my opinion, this is where a huge amount of the money has gone in Washington to pay for Kleiman and Botek studies. And you know what? We have a device for figuring out what the right amount is. It's called the market. It works really well. And it's the problems are compounding right now as medical is being folded in. Because when they this time, Botek did an estimate of how much demand would be filled to meet the medical demand, and again spent a bunch of money, did a huge study, and then was like, it's 1/3 black market, 1/3 medical, 1/3 adult use. That's my numbers. You're like, oh, really? You got it? Oh, well, that's a round number. That's amazing. And then they gave a big grant to the University of Washington to a lawyer who had graduated 6 months before and a class of law students to estimate what the canopy space was needed. So they were trying to figure out what was needed for the demand. So should we let some of these folks who were the medical providers or who were in the collective gardens before, do we need to give some more licenses out so those guys can come in? And they looked just at supply side. They didn't look at demand at all. Like, maybe if you're medical, you want a different type of supply. They didn't look at that at all. Instead, they tried to look in, again, estimating this not previously recorded black market or gray market demand. And they came out with a number that said, nope, we don't need any more canopy space. So don't bring in any of those people who have been doing this for 10 years when it was with great liability, when it was with great risk. So market caps. This is, I can't speak for other states, but I can say in Washington, I think we've spent a lot of money that we could have spent on educational campaigns. There really are none in Washington to talk to children. There haven't been really any effective ones. And business hasn't come in, because wasn't the go low, go slow here, wasn't that industry paid for here in Colorado? I think it might have been, because there was the rats in the cage approach that the state did, that nobody really liked that one. Don't be a lab rat, don't be experimented on. But then I think industry came back with some. So in Washington, even though I-502, that's our initiative, set money aside for educational campaigns, that money was taken and not used for educational campaigns, and Botek got a ton of it to tell us exactly how many retail locations are required. Oh, yeah. Correct. That is one of his main tenets. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Yes. So, Kleiman, we'll see if we see him again. And we'll see if we see... Okay, and just one more thing. And it's not an appropriate context, but I'm going to do it anyway. If we had a Trump presidency, and we had Chris Christie, who I thought was going to be the Attorney General based on a few of the tea leaves, but now is going to be on the transition team in charge of who will run the DEA and the DOJ and all that. Does Trump care a ton about weed? I don't know. But do you know who does? Chris Christie. So that
You're really clouding the energy in this room right now.
Yeah, no doubt about that. Oh, just the idea of Chris Christie involved in a presidential transition team, appointing the heads of DEA, FDA, NIDA, drug czar. Oh, my God. I think I threw up in my mouth a little. I'm going to have to cure this nausea with a little bit of a safety break, so we'll be right back.
Keep your cannabis cravings under control. Feed your mind with CannabisRadio.com.
Ganjapreneur.com, your guide to the cannabis business world. Ganjapreneur.com is a comprehensive resource for cannabis professionals and entrepreneurs. Download the Ganjapreneur app on your smartphone or tablet to catch up on cannabis industry news, scroll through our daily job listings, and learn about successful cannabis companies, executives, and investors. Ganjapreneur.com, helping Ganjapreneurs grow.
It's time for Cannabis Facts about teen drug use from Robert Platshorn's thesilvertour.org. This message is supported by our donors and Hemp Inc., a public company poised to lead America's hemp revolution at hempinc.com. A recent survey by the U.S. Centers for Disease Control indicates that in states that have legalized medical marijuana, the rate of marijuana consumption among high school students has not increased. In fact, in legal states like Colorado, teen use has actually decreased significantly. It's simply no longer a big deal for teenagers in legal states. This was Cannabis Facts from thesilvertour.org, an educational nonprofit supported by our donors and Hemp Inc., a public company poised to lead America's hemp revolution at hempinc.com.
The Russ Belville Show on CannabisRadio.com, the National Wildlife Refuge for Marijuana Unicorns.
With over 6 years of experience in the industry, New Era CPAs is one of the nation's leading cannabis accounting firms, helping hundreds of growers, dispensaries, and ancillary companies with their tax, legal, and business strategies. New Era CPA's offices cover the West Coast from Seattle to San Diego, and their skilled team is always available to help you take your business to the next level. Visit neweracpas.com for more info and set up a consultation. Welcome to the New Era.
Warning, hits taken on this show are larger than they appear. Do not try this at home. These people are professionals. Or at least they pay me to say that. This is the Russ Belville Show on CannabisRadio.com.
Welcome back, everybody. 23 after the hour, and we continue our look at the NORML Aspen legal seminar. Got a great presentation by an attorney who has litigated in front of the Supreme Court. And here is Adam Wolf discussing one of the federal cases that is trying to use civil RICO statutes. Those are the statutes we use against mobsters to take down Colorado's legal marijuana industry.
Let's start talking about those three. And the first of the three, Safe Streets Alliance versus Medical Marijuana of the Rockies. Jerry Olson was the owner of Medical Marijuana of the Rockies. It was based in Frisco, Colorado, which is, about 10 miles from Breckenridge? He owned a store. He owned and operated a store. It had been doing fairly well, fairly successful for a number of years, and Jerry decided that he wanted to move his shop. And so he entered into an intent to purchase a building that was much closer to the freeway entrance. And it would have been a much larger building, a much bigger footprint for Jerry. Things seemed to be going at least according to plan, and as Jerry was working through the financing of this, he was hit with a lawsuit. The building adjacent to the building he was going to purchase filed this lawsuit alleging that Jerry and a bunch of people he had been doing business with were racketeers under RICO. The building adjacent to Jerry's building was the Holiday Inn. So the Holiday Inn of Frisco brought this case. The Holiday Inn, mind you, that for some time had been receiving payments from a group of physicians to conduct consultations on the Holiday Inn's property, nonetheless filed this RICO case against Jerry. We're going to talk about some of the, yeah, please.
We're talking federal RICO, not state RICO.
Correct, absolutely. And so this was filed in federal court in the District of Colorado as a federal civil case. RICO has both a civil and a criminal component to it. This was the civil side. The case was filed not just against Jerry, but it was filed against the owner and seller of the building he was trying to acquire. It was filed against the individual who loaned Jerry money, right? And we're not talking about a big shop here. The guy apparently loaned Jerry $35,000. And as a result of that, this person got hit with a RICO lawsuit, which could have resulted in serious ruin for him in a whole lot of ways. They filed the case against Jerry's bank, against the construction worker who was working on the building to build it out for Jerry, against the bonding company, and against Jerry's accountant. We're going to talk a little bit in a few minutes just about the implications of that. And one of the things that I want to think about with all of you is whether we as attorneys, is everybody here an attorney, or most people here are attorneys? Whether we as an attorneys actually may have to worry about this ourselves. I think it's an interesting question. So the idea behind the case is simple, and in my mind, it's a little frighteningly simple. The main RICO statute, 18 U.S.C. 1962, prohibits two or more people from conspiring to violate any number of laws, right? And it specifies a number of them, and some of them are a little less specific. But in the case of RICO, it actually does, I have most of these up on a slide, not this particular one. The RICO statute does define racketeering activity to include, among other things, dealing in a controlled substance or listed chemical under the CSA, or the felonious manufacture, importation, receiving, concealment, buying, selling, or otherwise dealing in a controlled substance. So, at least on the surface, that would seem to cover the type of things that Jerry was alleged to be doing. I think one could try to make some arguments around that, but at least on the surface, that did seem to apply. Fair enough, I guess. But as I saw this case, we did at least have an ace in the hole, which is the Supreme Court's recent standing doctrine regarding RICO. And it's one of those instances where all of these, we have the U.S. Chamber of Commerce to thank for this. All of these conservative corporate entities have actually made serious inroads with the U.S. Supreme Court in trying to trim or narrow down the scope of RICO liability. And while that has bedeviled plaintiffs' lawyers over the years, it actually has worked wonders for Jerry Olson. And so, there it was. So RICO creates a private right of action for, quote, any person injured in his business or property by reason of racketeering activity. Okay? So the key words here are by reason of. Those three little words have spawned, I don't know, probably half a dozen Supreme Court cases. What does it mean to be injured by reason of activity? Because it's you have a spectrum, right? And this is like all of your causation cases that you may have. At one end of the spectrum, causation could not be any more clear. On the other end, it's rather attenuated, and you have 5 different steps or 5 different people it needs to go through until you have an injury. And what the Supreme Court has said is that it's over here, that it's a very narrow understanding or interpretation of causation. So the Supreme Court has said that by reason of, which the Supreme Court calls RICO proximate cause, you need to have a proximate cause or a direct injury. Okay? It needs to be the direct result. And there just needs to be one single step between the action and the injury. So far from, if you remember our spectrum here, right? Far from over here where you have 4 or 5 people touching this thing, you need to have one activity and that directly leading to injury. Now, this is what we wrote in Jerry's brief, that the civil RICO plaintiff must be the, quote, direct victim or the intended target of defendant's conduct. That's what the Supreme Court has said over the years. Now, that is a pretty stringent standard. You do not find such difficult causation standard in most federal statutes. And how did that play out in Jerry's case? Did anybody know what the alleged harm was to the plaintiff in this case, to the Holiday Inn?
Real estate value?
That's that pretty much is the other RICO case that I'm going to talk about. It's a very good point. So sort of closely associated with the hotel room prices is that they were losing customers, right? That they had a couple of high school ski teams that were coming in that had heard about this from God knows where and called up the hotel and decided to cancel their annual reservations. The other potential harm that they alleged to have suffered is that they had then spent money to mitigate the harm that they had thought maybe was going to befall them through Jerry's store. Now, that doesn't really fit neatly into the RICO proximate cause analysis. Certainly the Holiday Inn was not the, quote, intended target of Jerry's business, right? And it wasn't really fulfilling the, quote, the requisite single step between the action and their harm. At the very least, there was one other step, which is that somebody needed to read about this, call up the hotel, and cancel their reservations. So at the very least, you had 2 steps there. We actually argued it was 4 or 5 steps. But, yes?
But is that a net loss of business, or is it just one person saying, I don't want to go?
Good. So I was going to get there, but let's jump ahead. No. So when you're talking about, what do you have in mind?
What I have in mind is you'll have some organizations that will say, okay, I don't want my kids around there or what have you. But you'll have other organizations saying, hey, fantastic, you're right next door. Now I'm coming in and we're going to bring a big group. So
right.
They end up making more money in the long run.
Exactly. And so one of the things that I was, all right, spoiler alert, we won. They dismissed the case. And one of the reasons that I think they dismissed the case, and I'm getting to your point right now, is that we propounded some discovery that was aimed at exactly that. And I think it was going to be, Paul, we talked about this, I think. It was going to be super interesting to try to develop some evidentiary basis to say, hardly losing money, the Holiday Inn was going to win, right? It was going to be a net positive. And I think that the forces behind this that were paying for the Holiday Inn's case was actually concerned that what was going to develop out of these cases was not just a loss. It was not just a ruling saying that there's no proximate cause, that there's no civil RICO liability, but some finding by the court that Jerry's business was actually economically beneficial. And so I had a number of really interesting conversations with potential experts about how would you demonstrate a model for showing that Jerry's business was going to have a net positive result on the Holiday Inn. From a legal standpoint, from an expert law standpoint, it's a fairly challenging thing to do, but one can do that. There's certainly econometricians who could figure that out, and there's an emerging body of scholarship about the effect of more liberalized marijuana laws, and it would have been a super interesting discovery battle, and ultimately I think that may have been one of the things at least that led them to dismiss the case against Jerry. Let me go back to sort of this proximate cause thing, and the reason I am perseverating on this a bit is that I think it is super important as more of these RICO cases get filed, and more of them will get filed, for us to have an answer to the following question. The main response from the Holiday Inn regarding this proximate cause issue was, listen, RICO explicitly says that it applies to violations of the CSA. If you have this stringent standard that you're trying to apply to marijuana-related RICO offenses, you're basically saying civil RICO can never apply, right? That it's an empty set. Because the plaintiff is never the intended target, okay? It is actually a very interesting question in my mind, although I'm probably just a dork. So I spent quite a bit of time trying to figure out what would be a marijuana enterprise that could lead to RICO liability satisfying proximate cause. And so I would love for somebody to come up with an example. I think it would be helpful to know. I've maybe come up with one or two. Go on.
It's interesting how the opponents of marijuana reform are now taking to these RICO cases, civil RICO cases that he's talking about, trying to prove conspiracies. And as Adam Wolf continues in his presentation, he points out that the logical endpoint of all of these conspiracies would be the guy who cuts your lawn, the guy who delivers your newspaper could all be involved in these things if you take it to that extreme. That entire presentation will be part of our SoundCloud archive of the NORML Aspen Legal Seminar. When we come back from break, we've got one more clip from Mary Kahn, attorney from Texas, telling us how mental illness, the criminal justice system, and the drug war are all intertwined. We've got a little clip for you, and then we'll wind things up early so I can get off to the party.
This is the Russ Belville Show on CannabisRadio.com.
From dabs to chivas, sativas to indicas, we roll out a whole concentrate of fresh new content every week. It's like going from the greenhouse to the dispensary. CannabisRadio.com.
The National Cannabis Industry Association presents the 3rd Annual Cannabis Business Summit and Expo. The most influential business event in the marijuana industry returns for 3 days in Oakland, California. Join your fellow industry leaders and policy influencers June 20th through 22nd for an in-depth educational experience and network with more than 3,000 cannabis professionals. The 2016 Cannabis Business Summit and Expo will feature keynote presentations from California Lieutenant Governor Gavin Newsom and Numi Organic Tea CEO Ahmed Rahim, giving you insight into cutting-edge policy discussions and the most innovative business practices. All this plus the most comprehensive expo floor in the industry. The Cannabis Business Summit and Expo, June 20th through 22nd in Oakland. Don't miss out. Register right now at CannabisBusinessSummit.com and save 15% off registration using promo code RADIO15. That's CannabisBusinessSummit.com, promo code RADIO15.
Cannabis Confidential with Dr. Dina. Candid.
I want to give you the inside story.
Captivating.
I want to introduce you to my kind and amazingly talented friends.
Compelling.
We get to meet some of the most amazing cannabis activists and warriors around.
Listen in as medical marijuana pioneer Dr. Dina shares never-before-heard stories, chats with cannabis insiders and celebrity friends, and provides invaluable perspective and insight into one of the fastest-growing industries in the world.
I want to share with you what was once confidential information. Let's expose the truth, discuss the issues, and learn the facts.
Cannabis Confidential, only on CannabisRadio.com.
You're not high. You're listening to the Russ Belville Show on CannabisRadio.com.
The Supreme Court is wrong on the Second Amendment.
Okay, maybe you're high, too.
New beginner guitars and banjos are often constructed much better than ones built before your time. Why struggle? Get a new instrument or fix the old one. The trusted professionals at the Fingerboard Extension will evaluate your instrument for free. Repairs are priced for people who work for a living. Stop by the Fingerboard Extension downtown Corvallis at 120 Northwest 2nd Street today, or check out its inventory on the web at fingerboardextension.com.
Yarr! Thar be pirates here! Har, 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 har. You're tuned into the Russ Belville Show, the voice of the marijuana nation, only on CannabisRadio.com.
Welcome back, everybody. We're live in Aspen, Colorado for the NORML Aspen Legal Seminar, and we're winding things up today a little bit early because I've got to make my way to Jerry Goldstein's house for the NORML fundraising party. Should be a really good time. The former and current Pitkin County sheriffs will be there. There'll be medicated food. Chef Chris Lanter is catering. It's going to be great. But now we bring you one last clip. This is Mary Kahn, attorney from Texas, describing mental illness in America and how it's tied into the war on drugs and our criminal justice system.
How big is the mentally ill population? It depends on the definition of mentally ill. The Department of the Bureau of Justice reported in 2006, and again, I have to apologize. There are no recent studies that I could find. We worked for hours looking for more recent studies. So some of the statistics I'm going to give you are older than I'd like them to be, but I don't think they've actually changed. So 2006, 1.26 million breakdown, which is 45% of federal offenders, 56% of state offenders, and 64% of jail inmates were defined as having mental health issues because they were receiving some sort of treatment, which is, not that much. What about all the people who are not defined by the Bureau of Justice and are not receiving treatment, so they're not counted? It suggests to you, obviously, it's a whole lot worse. When the profile of a mentally ill person, it's funny. I can't. My eyes are so bad. It's these contacts. I'm sure it's not my age. Women represent the largest proportion of the incarcerated mentally ill generally, while men represent a higher percentage of the antisocial personality disorder. One of the things we do, like I had a psychologist call me yesterday, we've got a capital murder case where the guy's kind of out there, and we agreed to not test him for the things that would define him as any kind of personality disorder, which would be, of course, used immediately to slam him hard. So we have to be real careful about testing they would do with our clients, and I was grateful to have a good psychologist to help me figure that out. But we do have young men with these personality disorders, as antisocial disorders, and they're diagnosed as children. You can find television programs and YouTube shows about that. Those under 20, not surprisingly, have a higher rate of mental illness, and those over 55 have less mental illness. So some of us in this room are probably disqualified from being mentally ill, and I'm really happy about that. Caucasians are more likely to report mental illness than African Americans or Hispanics. I'm not sure what that means, because I know that different cultures have different attitudes about mental illness, and some people say, well, that mental illness or that PTSD thing, that's for those people in that other cultural group, not for my group. We don't do that kind of thing. I'm not sure, so I think there's an issue there related to that. Mentally ill people, 75% of them were unemployed when they were arrested, so obviously employment and work is a big deal. 28% were receiving illegal income. I'm not going to go into details, use your imagination. 40% had a general physical medical condition at the time, and all were twice as likely to have been homeless before entering the arrest situation than the non-mentally ill. So you've got mental illness and homelessness, which is no surprise to any of us who are in the system, working in the system. We all know that. But it's just, statistically, it's kind of interesting, and statistically you wonder what we're going to do about it. And I guess what I'm doing today is bringing you some issues and some problems, and hoping that I can inspire some people to think about those issues and those problems, and trying to help us figure out what the solutions are, because we've got a big problem. And again, NORML is doing what it's doing to decriminalize marijuana. Hopefully that will, and obviously it should, branch and expand into decriminalizing other things like homelessness, mental illness, other drugs of choice that are not necessarily harmful or are not involved in criminal activity as the common people, even us in our common sense, define it. So what is the treatment of a mentally ill offender? 65% of inmates identified as having severe psychiatric symptoms received no mental health treatment while incarcerated. 33% diagnosed with a mental illness reported being treated. So people die in prison and in jails for lack of treatment, for just absolute neglect. I was lucky some years ago. I had a good friend who was arrested for DWI in Houston. He'd had one glass of wine. When they did a breath test, it showed extremely low. There was no indication he was on any kind of drugs, which he was not. He was diabetic. He was in a diabetic situation, and I don't know what it was exactly, but they got him to the hospital. He was treated, given insulin or food or something, I don't know. And he ended up taking insulin by injection twice a day for the rest of his life. That was lucky for him, okay? How many people just sit in their jail cells untreated seriously ill and untreated and ignored and neglected, and they die. And there are lawsuits, great. And I acknowledge those of you who pursue those lawsuits because they need to be pursued, because the sheriffs and the jails and the cities have to be held accountable for the custody, for the people that are in their custody and care and control.
Mary Kahn speaking on the tragic issue of mental illness in America and how it's been shuffled over to the criminal justice system. Hopefully we can do something about that sometime soon, and maybe marijuana tax money can help fund that. That's all the time I got for today. I've got to call it early here on this beautiful Friday afternoon because we're headed off to the NORML Aspen Legal Seminar fundraiser party at Jerry Goldstein's house, catered by Chef Chris Lanter of the famed Aspen restaurant Cash Cash. So named because you need twice as much cash to eat there. But it's going to be good stuff, both infused and non-infused. Follow my Instagram feed at Radical Russ if you want to see some pictures. Thanks for joining us. For everyone at NORML and CannabisRadio.com, I'm Radical Russ. Thanks for joining us, and until next time, take care of each other, tokers.
This is the Russ Belville Show. The Russ Belville Show is blogging and podcasting daily at RadicalRuss.com.
You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it, and it goes down smooth. Hey!